Now, the other area that you go at, and you say is more or less a dodo bird, is, and you teach at the university, that the way pedagogy happens, especially at a post-secondary level, is destined to change in a radical way.
I think the smartest kids in Canada don't go to lectures. The big thing, I've talked to many youngsters, is to get an A without having ever gone to the lecture. One undergraduate at Harvard said to me, why would I go to a lecture with some TA talking to 300 people about Peter Drucker when I can go and interact with a real-time Peter Drucker on the internet? So they're just better ways of learning. So this is a potential generational clash, big time.
And that's starting to happen. I mean, there's some universities like MIT that are really moving in this direction already.
Oh yeah, well that's not so much on the model of pedagogy, that's on the second piece, which is how bizarre that we have tens of thousands of mathematics professors, each developing their own little way of explaining what an analysis of variance is or something like that. There are probably 10 best ways. And especially as content becomes software, there are 10 best interactive software programs that can help a youngster at their own pace understand what that is. So we need to create a meta university whereby all the universities contribute to this, and MIT is leading it.
The sector that's probably been most assaulted by the new digital world, and it just seems reeling, is media. And you say that newspapers, that in particular, their business model is in tatters. What do they have to do to survive, and is there a future for newspapers?
Well, 70 newspapers in North America have gone under. Since 2000. Right. Advertising revenues are down, and again, the economic situation is an accelerant of this structural change. But the basic problem is that the need that newspapers fulfilled is no longer a need. You don't need to read a newspaper to understand the latest news.
They don't break news anymore.
No.
No.
And in fact, as one youngster said, if the news is important, it will find me.
Yes.
You can create your own newspaper from Twitter feeds. You're the context provider and the curator of your own news. So this is a tough problem. But in the book, as you know, we outline a number of different approaches. So I'll just give you one. It's called the network news. Do you know that people have this stereotype that bloggers are a bunch of wacky people who say all kinds of sensationalist stuff? 28% of bloggers make a living, part of their living, doing that. And half of those, it's a full-time source of income. For that half, the vast majority of university degrees, and 40% of them have graduate degrees, and almost half of them are journalists, or former journalists. And these people are making money on advertising revenue. Why don't we create the virtual newspaper where we bring together a whole bunch of bloggers? We'll hire you to do the marketing and somebody else to do the accounting and the sort of actuarial economics to divvy up how the money is allocated. And we solve this big problem that's not being solved by things like the Huffington Post.
Right.
The Huffington Post is great. I mean, I write for it. There's Pulitzer Prize and Nobel Prize winners. It's 10 times bigger than the Globe and Mail, but journalists don't get paid.
10 times in terms of audience.
Yes.
But the staff is tiny, isn't it? 60 people or something?
Yeah, compared to thousands.
Because then again, they're relying on this large network of contributors.
Yeah, and A and B is they also have much lower costs because their product is made of bits, not of atoms. But we need to fix this. It's really important because we need to have good quality and investigative journalism, and the newspaper does provide some context and intelligence about what's important, but all of those seem pretty easy to fix. The big one is how do you pay journalists? And the model that I just proposed is one that appears will work.
Television also, that you say that traditional network television is more or less finished. What's going to replace it, in your view?
Well, television is becoming this really great application on the internet. I mean, lots of people watch this show. I'll bet you a lot of people will watch it afterwards on the web as well. And I mean, the story in the book, just one example, is this thing called Twit Cottage, which is a TV network produced by this guy named Leo Laporte. And I walked into his little cottage in a town north of San Francisco, and I got a cappuccino. I go inside, and there's Leo, and he's got screens everywhere and cameras and so on. And the living room is connected to the dining room with a glass window where the engineer sits. We go on air, we're broadcasting to 200,000 people. His entire global staff is 4 people. So this is a very different model of television. It's a huge challenge to the traditional networks.
You write also that this new network intelligence is challenging not simply traditional businesses, but the whole notion of our nation state. And that more and more what we're doing is we're seeing collaboration to solve global problems. You talk about one very interesting initiative, Kiva.
Yeah.
Tell our viewers more about this.
Kiva is, again, a self-organizing community based on the web to microfinance in the developing world. And microfinance meaning for $70 you can buy a pump that some farmer can step on and it'll irrigate a whole field and support a village. Now somehow our big aid agencies based on nation states can't get around to doing that. So Kiva just goes out and asks people for money. And it's raised a couple $100 million, and it's having a material impact in the lives of others.
And as a potential investor, I could pick and choose. I could see that, oh, there's this pump that needs $70 in this particular village, and that's what I would invest in.
Absolutely, and you find out about the impact of your investment, which is a big change from throwing money at a lot of these old organizations. But this is very different. You know, we have these nation states that came out of the transition from agrarian feudal to industrial capitalism society, and nation states are kind of like the wrong size for the global economy. They're not going to go away, but they all go to Copenhagen, they try and get a deal to solve this little problem called climate change.
Yes.
Like we need to reindustrialize Earth, and we have 50 years to do it. They can't get a deal. Meanwhile, there are 30 to 40 million people organizing on the web around this issue. And they're not just talking about it, they're doing things. They're architects retrofitting old buildings and school kids changing carbon emissions in their district. This is the first time in history when the world is being mobilized where we're all on the same side. We've been mobilized around world wars before, but we were on different sides. So this is really interesting. We had these new multi-stakeholder networks that sort of cut across nation states that are actually solving global problems.
These networks are great levelers. I mean, they really do give the individual a sense of control, much more control over themselves, their ideas. And where we're seeing the clash between networks is with tyrannical regimes, you know, that and authoritarian regimes who don't want a lot of these. And we've heard about the Twitter revolution in Iran, but we also saw how these regimes work to crush networks and the ability of people to kind of have their voice heard beyond those regimes. Do you see collaboration and networks eventually leading to greater democracy?
Yes.
And the end of those regimes?
Well, yes. Iran is a good example. And there's been a lot of writing about, well, they kind of crushed it and they stopped it and they cut off Twitter and so on. No. You've got the biggest generation of young people proportionally to the rest of the population of any country in the world with access to secular information. This is not about who gets elected. This is a challenge to the theocracy, and the cat is out of the bag. The train has left the station. You know, the horse is out of the barn.
You think you can't suppress this? You can't regulate it? You can't legislate it?
You can take steps. Now, there is a dark side here. I mean, the old media, the printing press and broadcast media was one way, and it was one to many, and it was controllable. And well, you know, the old joke of the printing press is a great idea, freedom of the press, especially if you own a press. But the new media is kind of the antithesis of that. It's highly distributed, it's malleable, it's one-to-one and many-to-many, and it sort of has this awesome neutrality. It will be what we want it to be. And if we want it to be a medium to find a cure to AIDS or to map the heavens, as we talk about in macrowikinomics, we'll do that. If we want it to be a tool to organize Tea Party events where one of our goals is to eliminate public education, then that will be what we use it for as well.
Malcolm Gladwell has jumped in to this debate that you basically started and said, look, the revolution's never going to happen on Twitter because social networks by their nature create only weak bonds, and that real activism requires strong and close bonds. What's your response?
Well, there's no dichotomy between weak and and strong ties. In fact, most strong ties, other than mothers and their babies, start out being weak, and eventually they become strong. I mean, this is a, you know, he doth protest too much. Millions of people that can now self-organize and do things, and the book is full of examples of how people on an astronomical scale are making a real difference in the world. They're solving real problems. They're finding cures to diseases. They're contributing energy into the energy grid. They're saving lives in Haiti. They're addressing the challenges of climate change. I mean, the facts would just speak otherwise.
We're going to make you Prime Minister of Canada today. The one wiki change you would make first.
You know, I would try and engage the population in figuring out what to do about this country. I would hold a series of challenges on the internet. I'd hold a 3-day conversation of the entire population of the country as a first step towards a series of initiatives to engage people. Because there's huge wisdom and knowledge in the crowd and in individuals out there. Why not hold a 3-day conversation on jobs? We have a big problem. The jobless recovery. There's an oxymoron, if I ever heard of one. Tell that to these young kids who are graduating like never before from university. This is a terrible crime that we're committing on them. How do we reduce carbon? How about, you know, pick a topic and let's start to move towards a new model of democracy where citizens are not inert, where we have a culture of public deliberation based on active citizenship. That would be a start towards solving some of the many, many problems that we have and that my generation is leaving all these young kids.
The whole notion of open source collaboration networks has been around for a long time. Linux has been challenging Microsoft for over a decade, yet Microsoft is still strong, $60 billion in cash. What is it going to take for the transformation to happen, or is this just kind of wishful thinking?
No, it's happening right now. Do you remember, it was a decade ago, the U.S. Justice Department was suing Microsoft because they thought they were going to be a monopoly and own all software. Now the question is, can Microsoft survive? You know, and the onslaught from Google and now Facebook, and Microsoft was in the PC paradigm, and they had great difficulty. And Bill Gates has been very open about this, about changing their mental model and moving towards a network model. And this is the amazing thing, and why we wrote the book, that for every one of these stalled and failing institutions, we have these wonderful new initiatives that are based on these new principles, on the web, and on a whole new model. So this is a time of, I don't know, great danger and peril, but it's a time of great opportunity to me.
Don Tapscott, as always, I want to thank you very much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, I always love this. Thanks.